The ballroom shimmered under 1,000 chandeliers, every crystal catching light like a diamond. Waiters glided through golden arches, serving vintage champagne to people worth more than small countries. In the center of it all stood Jonathan Reed, a tall, poised black CEO whose quiet confidence turned heads even among the world's richest. He wasn't born into money, he built it, brick by brick, code by code. And then, it happened. A shrill laugh pierced through the music. Charlotte Whitmore, wife of oil billionaire Richard Whitmore, staggered slightly with a half-empty glass of red wine in her hand. Her diamond necklace glowed like fire as she turned to Jonathan. "Well, if it isn't the charity project that made it to the top," she sneered. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me." Charlotte smirked and tilted her glass. "Oh, come on. Don't pretend you belong here. You build apps, darling, we build empires." And before anyone could react, she poured the entire glass of wine on his perfectly tailored white shirt. Gasps rippled across the room. The music stopped. Every billionaire, investor, and journalist froze. Jonathan stood still, red dripping down his chest like blood, his dignity soaking into the marble floor. Charlotte grinned, satisfied. "Oops," she said, "guess some stains never wash off." And then, Jonathan smiled. Just a slow, dangerous smile. Seconds later, something happened that destroyed everything she thought she knew. For a few seconds after the wine spilled, the entire ballroom stood frozen in disbelief. The deep burgundy stain spread across Jonathan Reed's crisp white shirt like a wound. The scent of expensive Merlot clung to the air, sharp and humiliating. Even the string quartet stopped playing mid-note. Cameras tilted, murmurs rose, and in that silence, you could almost hear reputations trembling. Charlotte Whitmore smirked as if she'd just won some private battle. "You should have seen your face," she said, laughing as her diamond earrings danced in the chandelier light. "You really thought they'd let you sit at the founder's table." Jonathan didn't move. His jaw flexed once, but his eyes stayed calm, that unnerving kind of calm that made people wonder what was coming next. He pulled a folded handkerchief from his pocket, dabbed the stain gently, and said, in a voice too quiet for comfort, "I'll replace the shirt. But I'm not sure how you'll replace your dignity." Her smile faltered for half a second before she laughed it off, tossing her hair. "Oh, please, don't get dramatic. It's a party." But around them, faces shifted. Some guests looked away uncomfortably, others whispered into champagne flutes, already deciding which side they'd take by morning. Near the corner, Jonathan's assistant, Maya, gripped her tablet so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Sir," she whispered, "we can leave. You don't have to take this." He shook his head slightly. "If I leave, I make her right." At that, Charlotte's husband, Richard Whitmore, stepped forward, tall, broad, and visibly embarrassed. "Charlotte, that's enough," he said, his tone sharp. But she ignored him. "No, Rich, it's not enough," she said loudly, drawing even more attention. "This man thinks he can buy respect just because he has some flashy tech company. Let me remind him that money can't buy class." Jonathan's eyes flickered, but he didn't reply. He looked around, at the glittering crowd, at the journalists subtly raising their phones, at the so-called friends who were pretending not to see. Then he placed his champagne flute down gently on the nearest tray, straightened his jacket, and said evenly, "You're right, Mrs. Whitmore. Money can't buy class. But it does reveal who never had any to begin with." A ripple went through the crowd. A few suppressed gasps. The band members exchanged glances. Charlotte's face turned crimson. "How dare you?" she began, but Richard interrupted again, his patience gone. "Charlotte, go wait in the car." His voice was final this time. She blinked, stunned, then hissed something under her breath and stomped off toward the exit, her heels echoing like gunshots against the marble. The ballroom remained thick with tension. Everyone expected Jonathan to storm out or retaliate. But instead, he walked calmly to the microphone on stage. The event, ironically, was to celebrate philanthropy and innovation, the very reason Jonathan had been invited. His company, Reed Tech, had just donated $50 million to rebuild underfunded schools across the country. He adjusted the mic and looked out at the sea of uncomfortable faces. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, "tonight was meant to be a celebration, not of wealth, but of what wealth can do." He paused, letting the silence breathe. "But it seems we still have some lessons to learn about what real power looks like. It's not in your last name. It's not in the zeros on your balance sheet. It's in how you treat people when you think no one's watching." Every eye was on him. Even Richard looked down, ashamed. Jonathan continued, his tone deepening with quiet authority. I was raised by a mother who scrubbed hospital floors so I could go to school. She taught me something you won't find in a stock portfolio, that respect isn't given, it's earned. And dignity. That's something no one can pour out of a glass. The room broke into applause, hesitant at first, then stronger, rolling like a wave. Cameras flashed. Journalists were already typing furiously. Charlotte, at the doorway, froze in disbelief as she saw people standing for the man she just humiliated. Jonathan nodded once, then stepped off stage. Maya met him near the side hallway, her eyes wet. You didn't have to do that speech, sir. He smiled softly. Yes, I did. Not for them, for the ones watching who've been told they don't belong. As they left the ballroom, the applause still echoed. Behind him, Richard Whitmore stood alone, watching the man his wife had tried to humiliate walk out with more respect than anyone in the room. When the doors closed behind Jonathan, a reporter leaned toward her camera crew and whispered, that was the moment everything changed. She was right. Because that speech didn't just trend on social media, it set off a chain reaction that would destroy more than just reputations. It would expose lies, unravel alliances, and make one powerful family fall from the highest of towers. And Jonathan Reed. He was just getting started. By morning, the video had already gone viral. The clip of Charlotte Whitmore pouring red wine on Jonathan Reed, followed by his calm, powerful speech, was everywhere. News anchors called it the gala incident. Hashtags like #RespectOverRiches and #JonathanReedMoment flooded social media. In one clip, Charlotte's mocking words played on repeat, "You don't belong here." Then came Jonathan's voice, deep and calm. Dignity is something no one can pour out of a glass. It wasn't just trending, it was transforming. Inside his Manhattan penthouse, Jonathan watched the storm unfold on the morning news. He stood by the window, coffee in hand, looking out at the skyline that once symbolized everything he'd fought for. But today, it felt smaller, as if the world was closing in and widening all at once. Maya entered with her tablet. "You're on every channel, sir. CNN, Bloomberg, even the morning talk shows. They are calling it a masterclass in composure." Jonathan sighed. "Composure doesn't pay the price of humiliation, Maya. But I suppose it teaches who's really watching." She scrolled through the headlines. Richard Whitmore's company stock dropped 6% overnight. Investors are nervous. And there's something else, she hesitated. People are starting to dig into the Whitmore's foundation finances. There are inconsistencies. Jonathan turned to her slowly. Inconsistencies. Donations that don't match tax records. Large transfers to offshore accounts. A whistleblower even hinted they used charity money for personal investments. Jonathan's brows furrowed. And this came out after the video. Yes, sir. Someone leaked it anonymously. He looked out the window again, his reflection merging with the city lights. Then the storm's not just about a spilled glass anymore. Across town, chaos brewed in the Whitmore mansion. Charlotte paced the marble foyer in a silk robe, her eyes red from sleeplessness. "Do you have any idea what they are saying about me online, Richard?" she shouted, clutching her phone. "They are calling me a racist, a bully, a monster. I can't even go to brunch without being recognized." Richard sat at the table, silent, reading through legal documents. His once perfect posture sagged under the weight of scandal. "Charlotte," he said tiredly, "you didn't just insult him. You embarrassed this family in front of the entire business world." She slammed her phone on the table. "Oh please, he's milking it. He wanted attention, and now he's getting it. Everyone's acting like he's some saint." Richard's tone hardened. "He didn't leak the financial reports, did he? Because if he did, we're in deeper trouble than you realize." Charlotte blinked. "What reports?" Richard's eyes met hers, cold and sharp. "The foundation audit. Someone sent it to the press. If it gets out that I used charity funds to cover losses in Whitmore Energy, we could be looking at federal charges." Her voice trembled. You said it was handled." "I said it was buried," he hissed. "But now, someone's digging it back up." That afternoon, Jonathan's phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. She didn't just spill wine. She spilled secrets. "Check Whitmore Foundation files. You'll find what they fear most." He stared at the message, his mind racing. "Who are you?" he typed back. No response. Just the soft hum of his city view and the whisper of fate turning its gears. Maya walked in a moment later, holding a folder. "You'll want to see this. The Whitmores are panicking. Their PR team's offering to collaborate on a joint statement, say it was all a misunderstanding." Jonathan gave a short, humorless laugh. "They think a press release can erase humiliation." "Sir," she said carefully, "this is a chance to take the high road again. People already love you. You don't need revenge." He looked at her, really looked at her, and his expression softened for a moment. "Maya, I'm not after revenge. I'm after truth. What she did was public, but what they've done behind closed doors, that's what destroys lives." That evening, Jonathan attended a private investor dinner. Every conversation paused when he walked in. Some offered handshakes, others avoided eye contact. The air was thick with the kind of nervous respect that only comes after public humiliation turned to triumph. A gray-haired investor approached him quietly. "Mr. Reed," he said, "off the record, Whitmore Energy's been laundering donations for years." Everyone knew. No one said anything. Jonathan's eyes sharpened. "And now, the man whispered, everyone's watching you." Back at the Whitmore mansion, Charlotte sat in front of a mirror, makeup half done, her reflection shaking. On the television behind her, Jonathan's interview was playing. Reporter: "What would you say to the woman who tried to humiliate you?" Jonathan: "I'd say I forgive her. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Sometimes it means exposing the truth so no one else suffers the same way." Charlotte's lipstick trembled in her hand. "He's coming for us," she muttered. Richard entered the room, pale. "He doesn't have to. The media already did." He dropped a newspaper on her vanity. The headline screamed, "Whitmore charity scandal, millions missing." Charlotte's hand flew to her mouth. No, this can't be happening." Richard looked at her with quiet despair. "You wanted to pour wine on power, Charlotte. You forgot, real power doesn't stain." She turned toward him, her voice barely a whisper. "What are we going to do?" He looked at the flickering TV screen, Jonathan's calm face smiling back at him. "We're going to pray he doesn't decide to destroy us completely." Outside, rain began to fall softly over Manhattan, a whisper before the storm that was about to sweep through every lie, every secret, and every name that once thought itself untouchable. And Jonathan Reed, he wasn't done forgiving. He was just beginning to reveal. The next morning, Jonathan Reed's office at Reed Tech Tower buzzed with quiet tension. The city outside was loud with sirens and headlines. The Whitmore scandal had exploded overnight. Every news outlet ran the same footage, Charlotte's humiliation at the gala, followed by leaked documents showing millions siphoned from the Whitmore Foundation into private accounts. Jonathan sat in his glass-walled office, overlooking the skyline that had once seemed invincible. His reflection glimmered against the window, half in shadow, half in light. In his hand, he held a small, worn-out photograph of a woman, his mother, Evelyn Reed, smiling in her janitor's uniform, holding him as a boy outside an old hospital. Maya stepped in quietly. "Sir, the FBI's opening an investigation into the Whitmores. Reporters want your comment. You've become the face of integrity overnight." Jonathan looked at her, eyes heavy but calm. "Funny," he said softly, "how they love you when you stand against corruption, until you remind them they helped build it." Maya hesitated. "Do you want me to decline interviews?" He shook his head. "No, I'll talk. But not for headlines, for truth." That afternoon, Jonathan was invited to a televised interview at CNBC's studio. The city watched, waiting for his every word. As the cameras rolled, the host leaned forward. "Mr. Reed, you've become a symbol overnight, humility in the face of arrogance. How do you feel seeing the Whitmores fall?" Jonathan's expression stayed measured. "I don't celebrate other people's downfall," he said quietly. "But when truth finally breaks free, it doesn't ask for permission. It simply demands to be heard." The interviewer smiled nervously. "There are rumors that your past connection to the Whitmores goes deeper than business. Is that true?" Jonathan's gaze flickered for a brief second, just long enough for viewers to sense there was more beneath his composure. "Yes," he said finally, "it does go deeper." The host blinked. "Would you care to elaborate?" Jonathan leaned slightly forward, his voice calm but firm. "The Whitmores once owned the hospital where my mother worked as a janitor. She was fired without cause after refusing to clean up after one of their private events, an event where they mocked her for being too proud for her place. We lost everything that year. I was 16. The room went silent. He continued, voice steady despite the tremor of memory. She died 2 years later, heart failure brought on by overwork and stress. They never apologized. Not once. So when Charlotte poured that wine on me, it wasn't just about humiliation. It was history repeating itself, arrogance against dignity. But this time, I didn't bow. Across millions of screens, people watched, stunned, silent, emotional. Meanwhile, inside the Whitmore estate, Charlotte watched the interview, her mascara smudged, her hands trembling. "He's making us look like villains," she whispered. Richard stared at the screen, his face hollow. "We are the villains, Charlotte." She turned sharply. "You think this is my fault?" He slammed a folder onto the desk. "If you hadn't done what you did, no one would have dug into the foundation. We'd still be untouchable." Charlotte's voice cracked. "You think he's going to stop there? He's exposing everything. He wants revenge." Richard's jaw tightened. "Then we'll fight back. If the world loves a hero, we'll make him look like a fraud." Charlotte blinked. "How?" He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Everyone has secrets, Charlotte. And Jonathan Reed isn't as clean as he pretends to be." That night, Jonathan returned home, exhausted but resolute. The city lights flickered outside like restless stars. He poured himself a glass of water and sat at his desk, reviewing emails when his phone buzzed. It was a message from the same unknown number as before. "They are digging. Be ready. They'll use your father's name." Jonathan froze. His father, a name he hadn't spoken in years. His throat tightened as memories flooded back, a man who'd walked out when Jonathan was 8, leaving only debts and silence behind. He typed quickly, "Who are you?" No reply. He leaned back, staring at the city, the empire he'd built from nothing, now trembling under ghosts he thought he'd buried. The next morning, headlines shifted. Sources claim Reed Tech's founder hid family ties to scandal. Rumors spread like wildfire that Jonathan's estranged father had once worked for a Whitmore subsidiary and was allegedly involved in shady accounting decades ago. The media framed it as hypocrisy. Maya burst into his office, panicked. "Sir, they are trying to smear you. Someone leaked falsified records linking your father to the Whitmore's corruption. It's spreading fast." Jonathan's face hardened. "Then it's begun." He stood, buttoning his jacket. "Get the legal team ready. We fight with truth, not noise." Maya hesitated. "Jonathan, if your father really was involved." He cut her off gently. "He wasn't. But even if he was, I'm not him. That's what they'll never understand." Later that evening, Jonathan received a call from an unexpected number. When he answered, a gravelly voice spoke. "Jonathan, it's Richard Whitmore." Jonathan's grip tightened. "You have some nerve calling me." Richard sighed. "Listen, this thing is getting out of hand. The FBI's closing in, my lawyers are panicking, and Charlotte's losing it. But we both know you're not innocent either. Your company's competitors are digging into your past. If this war continues, it'll destroy both of us." Jonathan's tone turned cold. "Then maybe destruction is the only language you understand. You think you can win." Richard barked. "You think the world won't turn on you too?" Jonathan's silence was sharp as a blade. Then he said quietly, "Maybe. But I can sleep at night knowing I didn't build my empire on other people's pain." And with that, he hung up. He looked out at the skyline again, vast, glittering, untouchable, and whispered to himself, "Names carry weight. But truth carries legacy." What Jonathan didn't know was that someone else was about to step forward, someone tied to his past and the Whitmore sins, and when they did, it would shake everything he thought he knew about justice, forgiveness, and the true price of power. 2 days later, the storm reached its peak. Every news channel in America blared the same story. Whitmore scandal deepens, Reed Tech founder's family linked to missing funds. It was a smear campaign, carefully planted, strategically timed. The Whitmores were bleeding, but they were determined to drag Jonathan down with them. Inside Reed Tech Tower, chaos brewed. Journalists surrounded the building like vultures, their cameras flashing, shouting questions Jonathan ignored. Inside the boardroom, his executives whispered in anxious tones, wondering if their company could survive the blast. Jonathan entered the meeting room in silence. His presence alone was enough to make the chatter stop. "Sit," he said quietly. The tone was calm, but the kind of calm that warned of an approaching storm. Maya handed him a folder. "They are saying your father, Robert Reed, worked as an accountant for Whitmore Energy 30 years ago. That he was fired for embezzlement." Jonathan's face remained still, but his eyes darkened. That's a lie. Yes, she said, but they've got fake documents to prove it. One of the executives cleared his throat nervously. Jonathan, the stock dropped 9% this morning. Investors want assurance you're not connected to any of this. Jonathan looked around the table. My company was built on integrity. I won't defend myself with PR spin. I'll defend it with truth. Another executive leaned forward, voice uncertain. With all due respect, sir, truth doesn't trend. Lies do. Jonathan's lips curved faintly. Then let's give them the truth in a way they can't ignore. That night, Jonathan called a press conference at Reed Tech headquarters. Hundreds gathered. Cameras lined the stage. Social media exploded with anticipation. Would the black CEO fall, or would he fight back? As he walked onto the stage, the air felt electric. The city skyline glowed behind him like judgment itself. Jonathan took the microphone and began, voice steady, eyes fierce. There's been talk, whispers about my family, about my father, about who I am. So let's end the whispering. He paused, scanning the audience. My father did work for Whitmore Energy 30 years ago. He was fired, yes, but not for embezzlement. He was fired because he found the embezzlement. Gasps rippled through the room. Cameras clicked furiously. Jonathan continued, each word slicing through the tension like a blade. He discovered that the Whitmores were diverting money meant for workers' health care into personal accounts. He reported it. They'd buried the report and fired him to protect themselves. We lost everything. They called him a thief to cover their own crimes. He stepped back, letting the weight of his words settle. And now they are doing the same thing, 30 years later. Some things never change. Behind him, a large screen lit up with documents, scanned copies of old reports, employee memos, and whistleblower statements. Maya had spent days digging them up. Proof that his father had been right. Proof that the Whitmores had been corrupt for generations. Jonathan's voice deepened. My name carries my father's blood. But his legacy isn't shame, it's courage. And I'll make sure the world remembers him for what he truly was, an honest man destroyed by dishonest ones. The room erupted in applause. The press shouted questions, but Jonathan simply nodded once and walked off stage, leaving the world buzzing with disbelief and admiration. Meanwhile, across the city, Richard Whitmore watched the broadcast from his private study. His face was pale, his hands trembling around a glass of whiskey. Is turning the entire narrative, he muttered. Charlotte stood by the window, her eyes hollow. You said he couldn't fight back. Richard slammed the glass on the table, shattering it. Because I thought he didn't have proof. He paced back and forth. If those documents are verified, we're done, Charlotte. The board, the investors, they'll abandon us. The foundation, the company, everything will collapse. She looked at him desperately. Then what do we do? He stopped, turning to her with a defeated stare. There's nothing left to do. The reckoning's here. That same night, as Jonathan sat in his quiet apartment, watching the city lights flicker, his phone buzzed again. The same anonymous number. Is not done yet. Whitmore plans to flee. Check the foundation accounts. He frowned, then immediately called Maya. Trace every Whitmore Foundation transfer in the last 48 hours. Now. Minutes later, she called back. Sir, I found it. They wired $10 million offshore just this morning. To the Cayman Islands. Jonathan's voice turned to steel. That's fraud in real time. Get the FBI on the line. By dawn, the agents raided Whitmore Energy headquarters. Helicopters circled the estate. Richard was handcuffed at the gates, his expensive robe soaked by rain, cameras flashing in his face. Charlotte screamed his name as officers led him away. The world watched the mighty fall. Later that evening, Jonathan stood at his mother's grave, the city skyline glowing faintly behind him. He placed a single white rose on the tombstone and whispered, "They can't hurt us anymore, Mom. You are right. Truth outlives lies." His phone buzzed again, this time, not with chaos, but with an email from the Department of Justice. Case closed. Reed Tech cleared. Whitmore indicted. Jonathan exhaled deeply, eyes glistening. Maya stood behind him quietly. "It's over," she said softly. He turned to her, voice low. "No, Maya. The storm just passed. Now comes the rebuilding." As they walked away, a gust of wind swept through the cemetery, rustling the leaves. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt the weight lift, the weight of his name, his father's name, his legacy. The world had tried to stain him like that red wine. But he'd learned something powerful. Truth doesn't stain, it purifies. And though the reckoning had come for the Whitmores, it had also brought Jonathan peace, the kind that comes only when justice finally speaks louder than power. The following morning, the skyline of Manhattan shimmered with the promise of change, though only a few people knew how much change was coming. Jonathan Cole sat quietly in his penthouse office, staring at the sunlight cutting through the glass. The city hummed beneath him, taxis honking, helicopters circling, and the endless rhythm of ambition. Yet Jonathan wasn't smiling. Not yet. The night before had left echoes in his mind. The gasp of the guests, the stunned silence of Richard Hensley, and the look on Victoria's face when she realized who she'd tried to humiliate. A knock came at the door. His assistant, Camille, peeked in nervously. "Mr. Cole, the press is downstairs. Every major network. They are asking for a statement about last night's incident." Jonathan rose from his chair, straightening his tie. "Tell them they'll get their statement, not words, Camille. Action." When he stepped out of his building that morning, reporters surrounded him like vultures. Questions flew. "Mr. Cole, is it true Mrs. Hensley assaulted you? Will you press charges? Did you already plan to buy Hensley Industries?" Jonathan didn't respond. He simply adjusted his cufflinks and stepped into his car, calm and unreadable. Inside, his driver glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "Sir, where to?" Jonathan's answer was simple: to the Hensley Tower. By the time he arrived, the boardroom of Hensley Industries was already filled. Executives whispered to one another, glancing nervously toward the empty chair at the head of the table. Richard Hensley was pacing at the window, his eyes red, his movements sharp with anxiety. He turned when the door opened, and froze. Jonathan entered like the calm before a storm. Every head turned. The billionaire CEO, the man whose company had quietly outbid Hensley Industries in 3 consecutive contracts, had just walked into the lion's den with a composed smile. "Cole," Richard hissed, "this isn't your playground. What do you want?" Jonathan slid a file across the polished mahogany table. "Actually, Richard, it is my playground now. Or rather, my company." Laughter rippled through a few confused faces, but it died instantly when Jonathan clicked the remote and projected documents on the screen. Stock acquisitions, board signatures, a signed transfer of controlling shares. He looked Richard in the eye. "While your PR team was cleaning up last night's scandal, your investors were panicking. I bought every controlling share they sold, quietly, legally, and effectively. As of 9:47 this morning, I'm the majority shareholder of Hensley Industries." Silence. Then gasps. Then the chair at the far end creaked as Richard stumbled back into it. You can't," he stammered. "I can," Jonathan said softly. "And I did." The board members' faces were a mixture of shock and relief that someone competent was finally in charge. Richard clenched his fists. "You humiliated my wife. You." Jonathan's tone sharpened. "Your wife humiliated herself. The only thing I did was stand up. And now, I'm standing over what you tried to destroy." He turned to the board. "Effective immediately, this company will undergo restructuring. Fairness, diversity, and merit will replace nepotism and prejudice. If that's a problem for anyone here, there's the door." A few executives exchanged looks. None moved, but Richard's voice broke, trembling with disbelief. "You're doing this for revenge." Jonathan looked at him for a long moment, then shook his head. "No, Richard. I'm doing it for respect. Something you never learned to give." He picked up his briefcase, ready to leave. "You see, power isn't about who screams loudest at a gala. It's about who walks away with dignity and who the world stands behind when the lights come back on." As he walked out, Richard's empire crumbled behind him, not with noise, but with silence. The kind of silence that follows when justice has spoken louder than vengeance. Outside, the city roared again. Reporters chased after Jonathan, shouting for comments. But he only paused once, looking at the towering building behind him. He whispered, almost to himself, "My mother used to say, one day, you'll eat at their table, son, and they'll realize you own the house." He got into the car and drove away, leaving behind the old world, the one built on arrogance and old money, and driving straight into a new one built on merit, vision, and grace. For the first time since that humiliating night, Jonathan smiled. Not because he'd won, but because he'd changed the game. And the world, for once, was watching a black man at the top, not as a token, not as a surprise, but as the rightful owner of his success. 2 weeks later, the golden lights of the city flickered across the tall glass of Cole Dynamics headquarters. Inside, Jonathan Cole sat alone in his corner office. The city below was alive, but he felt strangely still, as if he stood at the edge of both victory and something deeper, something quieter. The headlines had already crowned him, Jonathan Cole, the billionaire who bought his enemy's empire. Investors cheered, communities celebrated, and social media had turned him into a symbol of poetic justice. But inside, he wasn't celebrating. He felt the weight of every choice he'd made, every decision that had turned a public humiliation into a corporate revolution. As he looked out over the skyline, his phone buzzed. Camille's voice came softly through the speaker. "Sir, Mrs. Hensley is here." Jonathan turned slowly, caught off guard. "Victoria Hensley?" "Yes, sir. She says she needs to speak to you. Alone." Jonathan exhaled, leaning back in his chair. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded. "Send her in." The door opened, and Victoria stepped in, a woman transformed. Gone were the diamonds and pearls, gone was the haughty posture that once screamed entitlement. She wore a plain beige coat, her hair tied back, her face bare and pale. She clutched a small envelope in her hands. Jonathan stood but didn't speak. She looked at him, the man she'd poured wine on, the man she'd tried to humiliate. "Mr. Cole," she began, her voice trembling. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed to see you face to face." Jonathan's tone was calm but distant. "Why now, Mrs. Hensley?" She swallowed hard. "Because I've seen what happens when hate goes unchecked. My husband lost everything, the company, the board, the friends who used to flatter us. Not the man he used to be. And I realized something. I became like him. Cruel, thoughtless, and proud." She set the envelope on his desk. "This was a check I wrote last month to a charity ball I didn't even care about. I came here to return what I owe, an apology. You didn't deserve what I did. No one does." Jonathan studied her, seeing the exhaustion in her eyes. For the first time, she wasn't the billionaire's wife. She was just a person, broken, humbled, and human. He finally spoke, his voice soft yet powerful. "Mrs. Hensley, do you know what was hardest about that night? It wasn't the wine, or the whispers, or the humiliation. It was realizing that no amount of success could shield me from someone else's prejudice. That's a pain every black professional knows, to walk into a room and be judged before you even speak." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I can't undo what I did, but I'm sorry. I really am." He looked down for a moment, then walked to the window. "Do you believe in redemption?" he asked quietly. She hesitated. "I want to." Jonathan turned, his expression gentle now. "Then start there. Don't hide from what happened. Learn from it. Use your voice to stop others from doing the same. You have power. Use it better than you did before." Her tears fell freely. "You're kinder than I deserve." Jonathan gave a faint smile. Forgiveness isn't about who deserves it. It's about who chooses peace over poison. He picked up the envelope and handed it back to her. "Give this to someone who actually needs it. Maybe start a scholarship for a black student trying to enter business school. Let something good grow from something terrible." She nodded, unable to speak. As she turned to leave, she stopped at the door. "You've shown me more grace than I showed you. I'll never forget that." When she was gone, Jonathan sat back down, letting the silence fill the room. Camille entered a moment later, hesitant. "Sir, are you okay?" Jonathan nodded. For the first time in a long time, yes. That evening, he attended a youth entrepreneurship event at a community center in Harlem, the same neighborhood where his mother once worked double shifts to feed him. When he walked in, kids looked up in awe. One young boy, maybe 10, ran up and asked shyly, "Mr. Cole, is it true you bought the bad guy's company?" Jonathan laughed softly and knelt to the boy's level. "No, son. I just reminded the bad guy what fairness looks like." The boy grinned. "I want to be like you one day." Jonathan smiled warmly. "Then start now. Study hard. Be kind. And when someone doubts you, let that be your fuel, not your fire." The crowd applauded, and the moment filled the room with something powerful, not victory, but healing. As Jonathan looked around at those young faces, he realized something profound. Power wasn't about owning companies or headlines. It was about influence, the kind that lifted others, not crushed them. That night, as he left the center, the cool city air brushed his face. He looked up at the stars faintly visible between skyscrapers and whispered, "Mom, I did it. But more than that, I stayed true." And in that quiet moment, Jonathan Cole, the man the world had once mocked, walked into his car not as a conqueror, but as a man at peace. Because forgiveness had done what money never could. It had set him free.